against the people of Gaza. We are now up at a death toll of nearly 5,000 Palestinians. Huge proportion of them are children, and it's also worth mentioning that as well as Israel slaughtering nearly 5,000 people, there is an estimated 1,000 people buried under the rubble that they don't even have the equipment to dig out, because Israel is preventing the entry of aid at any meaningful level for the people of Gaza to try and take the emergency measures necessary to rescue people, and of course the trickle of aid, which is really just a PR exercise by Israel, but in reality is a fraction of what is needed to deal with the humanitarian catastrophe that is now taking place as Israel starves 2.2 million people of water, of food, of electricity, of medical supplies and other equipment necessary to deal with this catastrophic emergency resulting from the murderous, savage bombardment by Israel of Gaza. So we believe words of concern are not enough. The Irish government need to impose sanctions that should begin with the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador and be followed by comprehensive economic, political and trade sanctions, and we should be publicly calling, our government should publicly call for the referral of Israeli political and military leaders to the International Criminal Court for the commission of war crimes. These are self-confessed war crimes where we are seeing in front of our eyes the wholesale slaughter, indiscriminate murder of thousands of Palestinians and the ethnic cleansing of 1 million Palestinians from northern Gaza. We have also written to the Ceann Comhairle this morning asking for a particular debate about the role of the Israeli diplomatic mission in this country, because as well as justifying the slaughter of thousands of people in Gaza and the war crimes being committed, they are also now criticising the Irish president for calling them out for their crimes, and of course we had a tweet coming from the deputy head of mission accusing the Irish government of somehow funding terrorism, an outrageous claim, but indicating that there's really no lengths that Israel, and in this case the diplomatic mission of Israel, will go to try and blunt, neutralise, undermine legitimate criticism, necessary criticism of the crimes that Israel are committing in Gaza. So we believe there needs to be a debate, but we want to see the result of that debate being the expulsion of the ambassador and the imposition of sanctions on Israel. I just also want to say a word about Courtney Carey. For those who are not familiar, she contacted me in the last few days. Yesterday morning, I think it was, yesterday afternoon, I can't remember the time, but she contacted our office. I talked to her this morning, and she was sacked by the company Wix that operate down in Grand Canal Dock, which is an Israeli-owned company, and really it's quite extraordinary what happened to Courtney. She was sacked because she put up posts sympathetic to the Palestinians and calling out the crimes of Israel against the Palestinians, and pointing to the fact that the origin of this current terrible escalation of violence was the Israeli occupation, the apartheid system, the siege of Gaza, and for that she was sacked. But she also reported that, if you like, since October the 7th, the company, through its channels to the staff, were telling staff to put out pro-Israeli commentary, that it would be good for their employment, and of course when she put out something sympathetic to the Palestinians, was sacked and was subject to an absolute tirade of foul and filthy abuse, of threats that don't even bear mentioning. They're so horrific. Interestingly, she was told on social media that she was going to be fired before she was actually fired. So this is really shocking stuff, but indicating that this company appear to be operating as a mouthpiece for Israeli propaganda to attack anybody who voices legitimate and widespread criticism of Israel for the crimes that is committing. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So I want to call on the Irish Congress of Trade Unions to make a statement about the firing of Courtney Carey from her job in Wix. This is an extremely dangerous precedent that is being set here. A woman being fired from her job for speaking out against a brutal war, a worker being fired from their employment for expressing a political opinion. Not only can this have a chilling effect on many thousands of workers in this country at the moment, it can also set a really terrible precedent. And I think there's a responsibility on the trade union movement to speak out and make an issue of this, and I'm calling for that to be done. I think, as well as defending the right of workers to free speech, the trade union movement should be proactive now on taking practical action to stand up to the Israeli state's war drive. All right? The Dunnes Stores workers in this city in the 1980s showed how that could be done. They boycotted South African produce. Any worker who decides to boycott Israeli produce while they are trying to strangle Gaza deserves the support and the practical backing of the entire trade union movement. So I'm reiterating that call here today. The other point that I just want to make briefly is that as we speak here, what is probably the largest protest in the history of the state in support of better and more frequent public transport is taking place in Cork. At 11 minutes past 11 today, thousands of students in the Munster Technical University walked out of their classes to demand three things. Number one, cheap and affordable housing near the campus. Number two, better and more frequent public transport. And in the absence of that, for better car parking facilities. But the car parking facilities demand, while it is an important demand for people who drive 50 miles and who can't get parking anywhere near the university, I think the demand for better and more frequent public transport is key. Many students would take that option if it was available. And at the same time as thousands of students are making this protest, we have Green Party ministers in the government sitting at the cabinet table and failing to deliver. Failing to deliver what the students are requesting and campaigning for. They will say that public transport is improving. Well, that's debatable, but if it is, it's at a snail's pace. And we saw last week with the flooding and the climate crisis in Cork and in Waterford how urgent, fast action is needed. A practical way to do that is to massively increase investment in public transport. The government and the Green ministers are lagging way behind what the young people are calling for.
Morning, everybody. Just to kind of touch on in relation to the Citizens Assembly's recommendations, and obviously there's a clear voice from the Citizens Assembly in relation to changing the policy around drug policy in Ireland. So today I'll be raising with the Taoiseach that the recommendations from the Citizens Assembly that the government that are in situ will take the full report, 36 recommendations that go. They kind of fundamentally challenge the kind of antiquated laws around criminalising people. So the most important thing from the recommendations and the Citizens' Assembly is that the government take them recommendations on and change kind of the policy around those that have been criminalised and continue to be criminalised for drug use. There's also other recommendations around education, funding in relation to treatment services. But I think that the main message from the Citizens' Assembly, and it was very, very clear, that we've had 6 decades of a policy that doesn't work, criminalising people, sending people through the criminal justice system, sending people to jail for drug use doesn't work. And I think there's a very, 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 very majority view that this doesn't work, and we need to change our policies. And hopefully, with the current government, that they have the will and the stomach to change our current laws in relation to drug reform.
Ask Richard a question just in relation to there were 2 hostages released by Hamas today. Are you calling on Hamas to release the rest of the hostages? And just on the equivalence question, you talked about bringing Israel to the International Criminal Court and to be prosecuted for war crimes. Do you think Hamas should be prosecuted for war crimes in relation to the war crimes that happened on the 7th of October?
Well, I think all hostages should be released, but when I say all hostages, I want to be very clear what I mean. That includes the thousands of Palestinians who are in prison without trial or charge in the system of administrative detention. And again, you see, we get this one-sided narrative that it is only Hamas who've taken hostages. There are thousands and thousands of Palestinian people who are hostage. So what we need is a comprehensive release of all hostages, whether they are Palestinians in administrative detention, hundreds of whom, by the way, have been imprisoned without trial even in the last week, as well as any hostages held in Gaza. But of course, critical to the safety of the hostages that are held in Gaza is for Israel to stop bombing Gaza. The biggest threat, it would appear at the moment, to the hostages held in Gaza is Israeli bombing. A number of them have already been killed, as well as the thousands of Palestinians who are being murdered. So I'm not going to accept a sort of one-sided narrative that the United States and Britain, European Union leaders, and to some extent our own government have pushed, is that all this began with the actions that took place on October the 7th. What we are dealing with are the bitter consequences of decades of persecution of the Palestinians by Israel, with administrative detention, with the siege of Gaza, with ethnic cleansing, with settler violence against Palestinians, and then an escalation of violence that flows from that. So that's what we need to address, but it has to be all hostages, not just selectively picking on one particular group. On the International Criminal Court, any war crimes should be thoroughly investigated and prosecuted. But again, I just want to say that it is a shocking sort of contrast, is it not? The speed with which Western governments demanded the investigation and prosecution of war crimes against Vladimir Putin, which he had undoubtedly was committing, as against the failure to act against Israel, despite years of calls that Israel should be investigated, prosecuted for war crimes, whether it's the siege of Gaza, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, or the horrors that we are currently seeing. And I just want to remind people, Israel is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. Right? That's indicative of how abnormal and dysfunctional this regime is. It doesn't believe it should be held accountable for war crimes. It believes it should be allowed to kill Palestinians with impunity. So finally the world needs to recognise the impunity Israel has enjoyed for war crimes against Palestinians is the major reason we are seeing the horrors we are seeing at the moment.
But is the October 7th event, in its own, judged by its own light, is it a war crime in your estimation? I know you put,
I think it should.
You put a lot of context into it. We understand.
It should be investigated. It should be investigated. I don't think any of us really know all of the details, but it certainly should be investigated. And if war crimes were committed, they should be investigated and prosecuted. We don't know all the details, Harry. We don't know all the details
of what's happening inside Gaza.
Except that Israel itself publicly declared its intention to ethnically cleanse 1 million Palestinians. That's a public declaration by Israel of an intent to commit a war crime, and we are witnessing in front of our eyes the bombardment of 2.2 million people and the imposition of a siege to deprive the people of Gaza of water, electricity, food. Self-declared. Okay? So any and all war crimes should be investigated and prosecuted, regardless of who they are committed by. But when a state actually declares its intention and then carries it out in front of our eyes to commit war crimes, really there's no dispute about it, because they're telling us that they're committing those war crimes.
October the 7th, we don't know, Richard.
We don't know the full details of precisely what happened. Okay, it should be investigated, and I absolutely believe it should be investigated. Any and all war crimes should be investigated. But we know a hell of a lot more about what Israel is doing, because they're telling us what they're doing.
But we know that hundreds of people were killed at the music festival, that people were killed at kibbutzes. There weren't, we know that. There were 2 Irish citizens who died as a result of it as well.
Harry, I believe all war crimes should be investigated, regardless of who they are committed by. Okay? It's as simple as that. But I'm not going to prejudge the details of investigations, but what I am saying is, in the case of Israel, it's making a public declaration about its intent to commit actions which are in direct violation of international law. That's qualitatively different, in the sense that it's a public and open admission of an intent to commit a war crime.
Can I ask Mick briefly, as a TD from Cork, your reaction to the news today that the government is going to be increasing the level of compensation level to businesses, originally 20,000, now 100,000. That's really good news.
Yeah, I welcome the fact that the compensation threshold is being raised. I think anybody who witnesses or who got direct reports of what happened in the flood-hit areas, including Middleton, last week, will realise that people's homes have been wrecked, people's businesses have been wrecked. This is not a clean-up operation that you're back in business the next day or the day after, and it's a positive step. Having said that, we also have a situation where we have an insurance industry in this country that's making, I was going to say record profits. Are they higher than they were in the Celtic Tiber? If they're not record profits, they're next to near record profits at the moment, who refuse to provide insurance cover for businesses and homes in flood-hit areas. Businesses and homes in areas that are affected by floods should be able to access insurance, and if that can't be done through an insurance industry which is in private hands, I think it's a powerful case for public ownership of insurance in this country, and it being run for the needs of people rather than the profits of relatively few.
Anyone else?